Have you ever been pulled over for something minor and somehow ended up sitting on the side of the road for 45 minutes, watching the officer walk back and forth with no real explanation? That was not a coincidence, and it was not normal procedure. Those extra minutes were the result of 6 specific trained techniques designed to stretch your stop long enough to find a reason to search your car. And every single second you stayed past the legal end of that stop was time you never had to give. A traffic stop has a hard legal boundary that most drivers do not know exists, and cops are trained to push you past it before you realize what is happening. Subscribe right now, because what I am about to break down comes directly from lawyer analysis of real traffic stop cases. And this information could cut your next traffic stop from 45 minutes down to 5. This is the kind of knowledge your defense attorney would charge you $400 an hour to explain. Here is what you're about to learn. The 6 specific techniques officers use to stretch a routine stop into a full roadside investigation. The exact words that legally signal a stop should be ending right now. How the Supreme Court has already drawn the line on how long officers can legally keep you there, and the complete verbal toolkit for shutting down each extension attempt before it has a chance to grow. I have analyzed over 200 body cam videos, specifically studying the moments where routine stops transformed into extended investigations, and the same 6 patterns show up every single time. This is not about being hostile to law enforcement. This is about understanding that a traffic stop is a legal event with a beginning, a middle, and a hard legal ending point. The boundaries exist because courts put them there specifically to protect you. The problem is that nobody tells drivers where those boundaries are. And when you do not know where the line is, you cannot see when someone is pushing you across it. Here is the reality. A lawful traffic stop has one single purpose: to address the reason you were pulled over. That is it. Speeding, broken taillight, expired registration. Whatever the original reason was, that reason is the entire legal justification for the stop. The officer checks your documents, runs your plates, handles the ticket or the warning, hands your documents back. That sequence right there is the complete legal stop. Everything that happens after your documents are returned is either your voluntary choice to keep talking or a constitutional violation. Plain English, the moment that officer hands your stuff back, your legal obligation to stay is over. But here's the problem that affects almost every driver on every road in this country. Officers are trained in 6 specific ways to keep you there voluntarily past that moment. They are not forcing you. They are manipulating the situation so that you choose to stay, and then your choice to stay becomes legally significant. Most people have no idea they have been voluntarily extending their own traffic stops for years without realizing they had a legal exit the whole time. Let me show you exactly how the first extension trick works, because this one is so smooth you will probably not even feel it happening. Lawyers call it the post-stop conversation bridge, and it is exactly what it sounds like. The officer finishes everything. The ticket is written. The warning is ready. They walk back to your window, hand your license and registration back, and then immediately say something warm and casual. Something like, "So where are you headed tonight?" Or, "You live around here?" Or, "Long day?" It sounds completely harmless. It feels like small talk between 2 people wrapping up a routine interaction. It is not small talk. That casual question is a deliberate technique to keep you voluntarily engaged in conversation past the legal end of the stop. The moment you start answering, you have made the choice to stay. And once you are voluntarily staying, anything you say, anything the officer observes during that extended window, anything they notice in your car while you're chatting, all of it becomes fair game for further investigation. Here is exactly what you say the moment your documents are handed back, regardless of what the officer says next. You say this: "Thank you, officer. Am I free to go?" 6 words. Not aggressive, not rude, just clear and direct. Those 6 words do something legally precise. They require the officer to either confirm you're free to leave, in which case you leave immediately, or they require the officer to tell you that you are being detained, which means they now need to state a legal reason for that detention on camera. Bad way. Most drivers answer the casual question. They say something like, "Oh, I am just heading home, maybe 20 minutes from here." Now the officer knows your route, knows your destination, has bought 3 more minutes of observation time, and has you comfortably talking, which makes the next question feel just as natural to answer. Good way. Smart drivers take their documents, say, "Thank you, officer. Am I free to go?" and wait for the answer. The stop ends in seconds. This comes straight from Supreme Court rulings in both Illinois v. Caballes and Rodriguez v. United States, which together establish that once the traffic stop purpose is complete, detention requires new independent legal justification. Defense attorneys use this exact question in court to establish the precise moment a voluntary stop became an unlawful detention. Think back to your last traffic stop. Did an officer make small talk after handing your documents back? Drop a comment below and tell me what they asked, because I guarantee that question was not as random as it felt. The second extension trick is what legal analysts call the slow walk return, and it works on your patience rather than your words. After taking your documents back to the patrol car, the officer does not come back in 5 minutes. They come back in 20, or they come back once with a partial answer, go back again, come back with a colleague, and the whole thing turns into a 30-minute waiting game on the side of the road. Here's what is actually happening during that extended time. The officer is waiting for backup. They are waiting for a drug dog unit. They are hoping that the longer you sit there, the more anxious you become, and the more you will want to just consent to a search to end the wait. The extended absence is a pressure technique. Anxiety builds in that silence, and anxious drivers say things when the officer finally returns that cooperative, calm drivers would never say. Here's the reality. You are fully within your rights to ask how much longer the stop will take. Here's exactly what you say if the wait stretches beyond a reasonable time with no explanation. You look at the officer calmly and say this: "Officer, I want to cooperate fully. Can you give me an estimate of how much longer this stop will take?" Polite, reasonable, and legally significant. That question does two things at once. It signals that you understand a stop has a duration and you are tracking it. And it creates a documented moment on the officer's body cam showing you are aware of the time, which matters enormously if this stop ends up being challenged in court. Watch what happens when you ask this question. The officer either gives you a real answer that helps you understand what is happening, or they cannot give you a real answer, which is itself useful information showing the stop has moved past its legitimate purpose. Former police officers have confirmed this works because it demonstrates awareness without confrontation, which changes the entire dynamic of the stop. Bad way. Most drivers sit silently for 25 minutes, assuming the wait is standard procedure. They never question it. They give the officer unlimited time on the clock. Good way. Smart drivers say, "Officer, can you give me an estimate of how much longer this stop will take?" They stay calm, they stay polite, and they create a documented record that protects them. The third extension trick is the consent question loop, and this is the most direct of all 6. This is where the officer simply asks for consent to search. But they do not just ask once. They ask in multiple ways, in multiple tones with multiple framings, cycling through every angle until they find the version that breaks your resistance down. First attempt comes casual. "You mind if I take a quick look?" You say no. Second attempt comes softer. "I am just going to do a real fast sweep and you can be on your way." You say no again. Third attempt comes with social pressure. "You have got nothing to hide, right? So this should not be a problem." Each version is a different psychological approach to the same request. And here's the thing about the loop. It works. Most drivers eventually say yes just to end the discomfort of repeated questioning. They mistake ending the pressure for ending the problem. Here is exactly what you say every single time a search is requested, regardless of how the question is framed or how many times it is asked. You say this exact sentence every single time. "Officer, I do not consent to searches." Say those 6 words calmly and consistently. Do not change your wording. Do not explain why. Do not apologize for saying it. Just those 6 words, steady and clear, repeated as many times as the question gets asked. This is 100% legal. The Fourth Amendment gives you the absolute right to refuse consent to a search. Your refusal alone cannot be treated as probable cause. Watch what happens when you repeat this response without variation. The officer runs out of angles. They have no consent on record. If they also lack genuine probable cause, the search cannot legally proceed. The stop ends. This comes straight from Supreme Court rulings on the Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable searches. Legal experts agree this is your strongest protection against the consent loop because consistency on record eliminates the officer's ability to later claim your refusal was ambiguous. If you have made it this far, you are already more prepared for a traffic stop than 90% of drivers on the road right now. Hit that like button to show me you are taking this seriously. Because the next section covers the 3 tricks that are harder to spot and even more important to know. The fourth extension trick is the behavior observation pivot, and it is the hardest one to catch in the moment because it sounds like the officer is just making conversation. After the documents are handled and the stop should be wrapping up, the officer starts making observations out loud. You seem a little nervous. I notice you have a lot of air fresheners in there. Your eyes look pretty red. You were kind of hesitant when I asked where you were going. Well, each one of those statements is not just an observation. It is the officer building a documented record of reasonable suspicion that they can use to justify extending the stop. They are narrating a legal justification for further investigation in real time on their body cam. Here is the trick they do not want you knowing. You do not have to respond to any of those observations, not one of them, and responding to them with explanations or denials actually feeds the investigation rather than stopping it. Here's exactly what you say when an officer starts making observations about your behavior or your vehicle. You say this: "Officer, respectfully, Am I being detained for something beyond the original reason for this stop? That question draws a legal line on camera. It asks the officer to either commit to a new specific reason for your continued detention or acknowledge the stop should be ending. If they have a legitimate new reason, they will state it. If they do not, they cannot legally hold you. This is 100% legal. Former police officers have confirmed this works because it forces a decision point that the behavior observation pivot is specifically designed to avoid. Now let me walk you through the legal cases that make everything in this video rock solid, so you know this is backed by constitutional law and not just strategy. The first case you need to know is Rodriguez v. United States from 2015. Plain English. The Supreme Court ruled in this case that officers cannot extend a traffic stop even by a few extra minutes without having reasonable suspicion of something new beyond the original reason for the stop. This is the single most important case for everything you learned today. It is the legal foundation for your right to ask if you are free to go the moment your documents are returned. The second case is Illinois v. Caballes from 2005. Plain English, this case confirmed that the scope of a traffic stop is limited to addressing the reason for the stop itself, and any investigation beyond that scope requires independent legal justification. This backs up your consistent refusal of consent requests and your right to push back on the behavior observation pivot. The third case is Florida v. Bostic from 1991. Plain English, this case established that when an officer engages you in conversation after a stop is technically complete, your participation in that conversation is considered voluntary, and you have the right to decline and to leave. This is exactly why asking, "Am I free to go?" converts your entire situation from voluntary to legally detained, which triggers the officer's obligation to justify your continued presence. Now let me put everything together in one complete real scenario so you can see these four responses working as a full system. You get pulled over doing 42 in a 35 zone. You pull over safely, hands on the wheel, interior light on if it is dark. You hand over your documents without reaching first. Officer goes back to the patrol car. 12 minutes pass. Officer returns and hands you a warning, then says, "So where are you off to this evening?" Extension trick 1, the post-stop conversation bridge. You say, "Thank you, officer. Am I free to go?" Officer shifts tone. "Before you go, you mind if I just take a real quick look in the car?" Extension trick 3, the consent question loop. You say, "Officer, I do not consent to searches." Officer tries again. "It will literally take 2 minutes." You say again, "Officer, I do not consent to searches." Officer pauses and says, "You seem pretty nervous for someone who just got a warning." Extension trick 4, the behavior observation pivot. You say, "Officer, respectfully, am I being detained for something beyond the original reason for this stop?" Officer has no new legitimate reason. Officer says, "No, you are free to go." You say, "Thank you, officer. Have a good night." You drive away. That entire exchange from warning to leaving takes under 3 minutes. Now compare that to the wrong way. Same stop. Officer hands the warning over and asks where you're headed. You answer casually. Officer asks about the air fresheners. You explain nervously. Officer asks for a quick look. You say, "Okay," after the third time he asks. Search begins. 30 minutes later, you are explaining everything in your car to 2 officers. Same stop. 2 completely different outcomes. The only difference is 4 sentences you now know how to say. Coming up next week, I'm releasing the complete video on what to do when an officer claims they can smell something coming from your vehicle during a stop. Subscribe right now because that claim is used to justify more questionable searches than almost any other tactic on the road. And knowing the exact legal response to it could save you from an arrest that follows you for years. Quick recap of everything you just learned. When your documents are returned, say, "Am I free to go?" and do not answer any follow-up questions. If the stop is dragging on with no explanation, ask the officer how much longer it is expected to take. Every time a search is requested in any form, say, "I do not consent to searches," and say it the same way every time. And if an officer starts making observations about your behavior, ask directly whether you're being detained for something beyond the original reason for the stop. 4 sentences, all of them legal, all of them backed by Supreme Court decisions, all of them proven in real courtrooms to protect drivers who knew how to use them. Hit subscribe so you do not miss next week's video on the smell claim tactic, because that one is going to change how you handle the scariest moment of any traffic stop. Smash that like button if this video just made you realize your last long traffic stop could have ended 10 times faster. And drop a comment telling me which of these 6 extension tricks has been used on you, because after watching this, I guarantee at least one of them will sound very familiar. Stay safe out there.